Picture this: the roar of an ice hockey crowd, the clatter of skates carving tight turns, and the thunderous crash of bodies thrown into boards. Now ask yourself, how many brilliant careers have been sidelined, or even erased, by a single split-second collision on the ice? Tonight, we're diving into the story of Ed Kea, a name that once echoed through NHL arenas, but now often slips beneath the currents of sports history. It's a story of rising potential, a tragic twist that changed everything, and a legacy that remains half buried beneath the piles of statistics and highlight reels of bigger, flashier names. But what if this untold tale reveals more about the culture of professional hockey and the price of chasing dreams than any Stanley Cup final could? Ed Kea was born on January 19th, 1948, in Weesp, a small town in the Netherlands that was still rebuilding from the devastation of World War II. In that time and place, the mere idea of forging a career in professional hockey, especially the North American brand that Canadians fiercely protected as their birthright, was practically unheard of. The Dutch had their own sports traditions, including soccer and speed skating, but few families in the Netherlands regarded ice hockey as more than a niche pastime. Yet, fate intervened when Ed's father, seeking better economic opportunities, decided to move the family to Canada in the mid-1950s. They settled in Ontario, where the winters were colder, the ponds froze thicker, and the culture of hockey thrived like nowhere else. It was in these open-air rinks, under gray skies and flurries of snow, that Ed first learned the art of skating and the thrill of chasing a puck across the ice. At first, he was just another kid with a stick, chasing an impossible dream of someday playing in the National Hockey League. But even in local youth leagues, Ed stood out. His coaches noticed how quickly he mastered positional play, understanding how to angle opponents off the puck instead of relying on raw brawn. The neighborhood dads who refereed weekend games for fun recognized in Ed a certain composure. He wasn't the type to panic under pressure. If an opposing forward came barreling toward him, Ed calmly squared his shoulders, timed his poke checks, and turned the play around without fuss. He didn't have the flamboyant style of a born entertainer, but he had the mind of a chess player on skates. The quiet, methodical approach he honed in these early years would become his trademark, eventually earning him respect from coaches at higher levels. During the 1960s, the NHL was on the cusp of significant expansion. The original Six era, dominated by the Toronto Maple Leafs, Montreal Canadiens, Boston Bruins, Chicago Blackhawks, Detroit Red Wings, and New York Rangers, was giving way to the addition of new teams, new markets, and new opportunities for players who, until then, had few ways to break into the league. Scouts roamed Canada's junior circuits, eager to unearth the next generation of talent. Ed, who had grown taller and stronger by his late teens, caught their attention not with flashy end-to-end rushes, but with a steady presence that coaches could count on in any situation. At 6 feet 2 inches, he wasn't monstrous, but he was big enough to handle tough forwards. He wasn't the league's fastest skater, but his stride was smooth and economical, allowing him to conserve energy over long shifts. He seemed, in short, like the ideal stay-at-home defenseman, someone who'd protect the net without racking up flashy stats, yet do all the gritty work that keeps a team secure on the back end. Around 1972, Ed got his big break. The Atlanta Flames, a new expansion team eager to establish a defensive identity, took a chance on him. In those days, Atlanta wasn't exactly a hockey hotbed. The local fans were more accustomed to baseball's Braves or basketball's Hawks. Trying to carve a niche for hockey in the Deep South was a daunting task for the young franchise, and they needed players who were hungry to prove themselves. Ed moved to Georgia with the same determination he carried from his earliest days on the pond. If you watch old footage, you'll see him sporting the bright A crest of the Flames, stepping up to intercept passes or boxing out forwards near the crease. He didn't deliver the highlight reel checks that drew gasps from the crowd, but he was a master at disarming the opposition. With quiet confidence, Ed became a fixture on the Flames' defensive pairings, helping them battle for relevance in a league that was rapidly expanding its footprint. Off the ice, Ed faced the cultural shock of living in the American South, a stark contrast to Ontario's wintry climate and hockey-mad culture. Atlanta was a city of emerging skyscrapers, a hub of new business, and an intersection point for Southern traditions and modern aspirations. Hockey was still a novelty for many locals, who might attend games as a curious outing rather than an entrenched passion. Yet, despite these challenges, Ed found a community of fans who appreciated grit and honesty. The Flames' faithful might have been small in number compared to the likes of Montreal's Bell Center throngs, but they were devoted. They learned to chant his name when he broke up crucial plays or made savvy reads in the defensive zone. For Ed, every little cheer was proof that the sport could take root anywhere if given the right blend of passion, skill, and determination. Ed's steady play didn't go unnoticed by the rest of the league. Other teams respected his brand of hockey, seeing him as the epitome of a no-nonsense defenseman. But, as often happens in professional sports, a trade can shake up everything. After a few seasons, Ed found himself on the move, heading to the St. Louis Blues. The Blues had entered the NHL as part of the 1967 expansion, quickly finding favor with local fans who were hungry for a championship-caliber team. While the Blues hadn't yet won the Stanley Cup, they had built a tradition of hard-working rosters that embraced the city's underdog spirit. Ed slotted in perfectly, bringing his stable presence to a defensive group that needed depth and reliability. Fans in St. Louis, who prided themselves on their Midwestern work ethic, gravitated to Ed's style of play. He wasn't flashy, but he was reliable, a man who got the job done shift after shift, never complaining, never showboating. The city itself was in a state of transition. Once a bustling industrial center and a gateway to the West, St. Louis was searching for new economic pathways. Against this backdrop, the Blues offered a thrilling entertainment option, rallying the community around a common cause, bringing the Cup to Missouri. Under the bright lights of the Checkerdome, later known as the St. Louis Arena, Ed Kea became part of the city's hockey tapestry. He learned the local customs, embraced the rabid fan base, and forged strong bonds with teammates. The locker room was a tapestry of personalities, grizzled veterans who'd played in the original Six era, eager young prospects looking to make their mark, and established stars who commanded major ice time. Ed fit somewhere in the middle, trusted enough to be deployed in important defensive situations, but never the headline star. If someone had polled fans in the late 1970s about Ed Kea's future, they might have predicted a decade-long run in the league, culminating in a quiet retirement to a cabin by a lake where he'd recall the old days with a sense of pride. Indeed, by the time the 1980s rolled in, Ed had settled into his role as a dependable veteran. He wasn't wearing the C for captain, but he led by example. Younger defensemen often sought his advice about positioning or how to handle big forwards like Clark Gillies or Mark Messier. Coaches liked pairing him with more offensively minded defensemen, knowing he would stay back to cover any slip-ups. He'd show up early for practice, offering tips on gap control or how to read a forward's hips before they made their move. These behind-the-scenes gestures rarely show up on the highlight reels, but they form the backbone of many successful teams. Then came that fateful night in October 1982. The Blues were locked in a routine regular season contest, one of those marathon slates that can blur into memory. Hockey fans know the randomness of the game, how a single ricochet off the boards, a rut in the ice, or an awkward collision can derail the best-laid plans. Ed was battling for the puck near the boards when he was hit, toppling violently and slamming his head on the unforgiving ice. The crowd's usual roar drained away in an instant, replaced by an eerie hush. Trainers darted onto the ice, players gathered in concerned clusters, and the scoreboard's clock felt meaningless as everyone wondered, is he going to be okay? In the 1980s, the understanding of head injuries was worlds apart from today's. Concussion protocols barely existed in any formal capacity. A player who got their bell rung was often expected to shake it off unless they physically couldn't stand. Helmets had become mandatory only a few years prior, but they lacked many of the advanced safety features that modern designs offer. Despite the swirl of uncertainty, Ed was stretchered off the ice and rushed to a local hospital. The early prognosis was bleak. He had sustained a severe head injury that could affect everything from speech to motor skills. He was an NHL defenseman known for his consistency and resilience. Yet, in one cruel instant, that solid ground vanished under his feet. Rehabilitation was grueling. Ed spent weeks, then months, in various rehab facilities. He faced tasks that seemed almost insulting for someone who once patrolled an NHL blue line. Basic coordination drills, exercises to restore balance, memory tests to gauge cognitive function. For a lifelong athlete, the mental toll was as crushing as the physical. Rumors spread among fans that he might never walk without assistance again, that the notion of him returning to play professional hockey was a fantasy. But Ed refused to give up. Family members, friends, and longtime fans recount stories of his determination. How he'd push himself to do one more rep of a rehab exercise. How he'd force a shaky smile, even when his body felt alien and unresponsive. The broader hockey community was rattled, but not fully mobilized. The media covered the story initially, but the news cycle quickly pivoted to other developments. Gretzky breaking records, the Islanders chasing another cup, new expansions altering the balance of power. Ed Kea was just one of many lesser-known players who had been sidelined by catastrophic injuries. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the Blues organization offered moral support. Yet the harsh reality of professional sports meant they couldn't afford to hold a roster spot indefinitely for someone who might never return. It was a cruel but inescapable truth. Incredibly, Ed attempted a comeback. The determination that had fueled his rise from an immigrant kid in Ontario to an NHL defenseman hadn't evaporated. He managed to lace up his skates for a short stint in the minors, hoping to shake off the rust and prove that he could still contribute at a professional level. It was a bittersweet moment. On one hand, it testified to his unbreakable spirit. On the other, it exposed how vulnerable he still was. Despite his drive, another blow to the head ended all talk of a permanent return. Reality became inescapable. Ed Kea's NHL career was over for good. From that point forward, Ed tried to lead a normal life, albeit one under the weighty shadow of a serious brain injury. Some days, he was more like his old self, joking around, reminiscing about past games, and expressing hope for the future. Other days, the after effects of trauma plunged him into bouts of confusion, irritability, or despair. Neurological damage can be heartbreakingly unpredictable, and for a person whose identity was built around reliability, the chaos in his own mind felt doubly cruel. He channeled what energy he had into family life, enjoying simple pleasures like barbecues with neighbors or quiet fishing trips. But the ghosts of that on-ice collision would never fully release their grip on him. Hockey's breakneck nature had always been part of its appeal, the speed, the hits, the fearless attitudes. But Ed Kea's tragedy showcased the cost of that culture. In the years following his injury, the league made incremental strides toward understanding head trauma, but nothing dramatic. Concussions were still under-researched. Equipment manufacturers started experimenting with better helmets, but the changes were neither swift nor universally embraced. The prevailing ethos remained that hockey was a combat sport on ice, and if you couldn't handle the hits, you probably didn't belong out there. Decades later, class action lawsuits and tragic stories of enforcers passing away, Young would finally force the NHL to grapple with the gravity of brain injuries. By then, it was far too late for Ed Kea. In 1999, at the age of 51, Ed passed away under circumstances that deeply saddened those who knew him. He drowned in a swimming pool, an accident many attributed to the lingering complications of his head injury. The shock reverberated through a tight-knit circle of friends and teammates, but the broader hockey world barely paused. Unlike the passing of marquee legends, which garners massive tributes and documentary specials, Ed's death was noted but not exhaustively covered. For casual fans, he had long since slipped into obscurity, overshadowed by the league's biggest stars. The story of the collision, the comeback attempt, and the subsequent struggles never truly burned into the collective consciousness of hockey lore. Yet his story is as vital a piece of hockey's puzzle as the tales of Bobby Orr's revolutionary skating or Wayne Gretzky's scoring feats. It underscores that for every transcendent superstar, there are countless role players who sacrifice their bodies and invest their lives in a brutal, beautiful sport. Many of those role players face pitfalls and dangers rarely addressed by the highlight reels. If we zoom out further, we see that Ed Kea's plight parallels similar stories across all contact sports. NFL players suffering post-concussion syndrome, rugby players battling degenerative brain disease, and boxers whose battered minds never recover from repeated blows. This broader perspective reveals that Ed was far from alone in his struggle. However, he was part of a generation that had neither the benefit of advanced medical technology nor the backing of robust safety regulations. No one demanded thorough baseline testing before returning from a head injury. The romanticism of toughness overshadowed the need for caution. If there's a silver lining, it might be that each heartbreaking incident, his included, slowly inched professional leagues toward better protective measures and deeper research into traumatic brain injuries. In the midst of his personal battles, Ed still found ways to connect with the sport he loved. He occasionally visited local youth hockey programs, sometimes to watch from the stands, sometimes to offer informal tips. Parents would approach him, remembering their younger days cheering his name in St. Louis or Atlanta. Though his speech was occasionally labored, he enjoyed reminiscing about the simpler times, those stirring nights on the ice when the scoreboard gave meaning to the daily grind. One can imagine him smiling sadly, aware that he might have had many more of those nights if fortune had favored him differently. Those close to Ed recall him as a man who, despite his struggles, tried to maintain a sense of humor. A teammate from St. Louis once remarked that even when Ed had trouble standing or speaking clearly, his eyes would light up if you mentioned a memorable shift he played back in the 70s. In those flickers of recognition, you could see the soul of an athlete who genuinely cherished the game. The longing was palpable, the sense that, while life had moved on, part of him was still at the Checkerdome, poised on the blue line, reading the play, ready to intercept a pass. Some have suggested that if Ed's story had taken place in the modern era of social media, he might have received an outpouring of public support and ongoing coverage. Platforms like Twitter or YouTube could have served as rallying points for fans and fellow players to highlight his condition, demand accountability, and champion better safety protocols. Crowdfunding campaigns might have helped cover medical bills or offered financial relief to his family. But in the 1980s and 1990s, advocacy for players in such a predicament was minimal, overshadowed by the unstoppable forward march of sports narratives that gravitate toward success, not tragedy. The question of what might have been lingers heavily around Ed Kea's memory. Could he have been a mainstay in the Blues' defense, perhaps logging over 1,000 games, quietly guiding the team deep into the playoffs? Might he have transitioned into coaching, passing on his knowledge of positioning and discipline to a new generation of defensemen? And would he have ultimately retired on his own terms, taking a final lap around the rink to a standing ovation? We'll never know. His tale stands as a testament to the fragility of a career that can be built over decades and destroyed in an instant. Now, it's your turn to join the conversation. Have we done enough to honor stories like Ed Kea's? Could his journey have sparked deeper change if it had garnered more attention at the time? And what does his legacy say about the way professional leagues handle injuries even today? Let us know what you think in the comments. If you believe that quiet heroes deserve to have their stories told, share this with friends, family, or fellow fans. Because sometimes the real lessons in sports lie not in the trophy presentations, but in the human stories of those who never got the chance to hoist one. Ed Kea's name may not be emblazoned on the Stanley Cup, but his life stands as a testament to both the beauty and the brutality of the game. By remembering him, we ensure that his sacrifice and his unwavering love for hockey live on as more than just another forgotten statistic.